What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices refuses to be disrespected on live television? In just 32 seconds, a single dismissive comment would turn a routine interview into an unforgettable showdown that left an entire studio in absolute silence. This is the story of how Morgan Freeman walked off Jon Stewart's show. The stage was set like any other evening. The lights were bright. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, and Morgan Freeman sat across from Jon Stewart, ready for what should have been a straightforward conversation about his latest film project. Freeman had done hundreds of interviews before. He knew the rhythm, the dance, the give and take. But what he didn't know was that this interview would become something entirely different. Stewart opened with a smile, the kind of smile that seemed friendly enough on the surface. "So, Morgan, thanks for being here," he said, leaning back in his chair with an air of casual confidence. The audience applauded, and Freeman nodded graciously, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Happy to be here," Freeman replied, his voice carrying that unmistakable tone that had narrated countless films and documentaries. He seemed relaxed, at ease, prepared for a normal conversation. But Stewart had other plans. "You know, I've been thinking," Stewart began, and there was something in his tone that should have been a warning sign. "You've played God. You've played the president. You've played Nelson Mandela. Do you ever get tired of being, I don't know, so serious all the time?" The question hung in the air. It wasn't the warmest opening, but Freeman handled it with grace. "Well, I think the roles choose me as much as I choose them," he said calmly. "I'm drawn to characters with depth, with something to say." Stewart smirked. Right. Depth. But come on, when was the last time you just did something fun? Something that didn't require you to put on that deep, gravelly voice and pretend you're changing the world? A few audience members laughed, but it was an uncomfortable kind of laughter. Freeman's expression shifted ever so slightly. His eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "I don't pretend to change anything," he said, his voice still measured, but with a new edge to it. "I tell stories. That's what actors do." "Stories," Stewart repeated, nodding as if he was considering this profound wisdom. Sure. But let's be honest, Morgan. You've kind of cornered the market on playing the wise old man, haven't you? The guy who shows up, says something profound, and then disappears. It's basically your brand at this point." The atmosphere in the studio was changing. You could feel it. The audience wasn't laughing as much now. Freeman sat up a little straighter in his chair. "I wouldn't call it a brand," he said, and his voice was colder now. "I call it a career, built on choosing roles that mean something." Stewart waved his hand dismissively. Okay, don't get defensive. I'm just saying, you've got a formula, and it works, I'll give you that. But doesn't it ever feel a little, I don't know, repetitive? Freeman took a breath, a long, deliberate breath. "Every role is different," he said. "Every character has their own journey, their own truth. If you're suggesting that I'm somehow phoning it in, then you clearly haven't been paying attention to the work." "Oh, I've been paying attention," Stewart shot back, and now there was a sharpness to his tone that cut through the friendly facade. "I've been paying attention to the fact that you've basically been playing the same character for the last 20 years. Wise Morgan, calm Morgan, Morgan who's seen it all and knows better than everyone else." The audience was silent now. This wasn't banter anymore. This was something else entirely. Freeman's jaw tightened. "You know, Jon, I came here to talk about my film. If you want to have a conversation about my body of work, that's fine. But I'm not going to sit here and let you reduce everything I've done to some kind of gimmick." Stewart leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. "I'm not reducing anything. I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what we do here? Ask questions? Or are you too important for that now?" "Too important." Those two words landed like a slap across the face. Freeman stared at Stewart, and for a moment, The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. "I'm not too important for anything," Freeman said slowly, deliberately, "but I do expect a certain level of respect, especially from someone who claims to be a journalist." "A journalist?" Stewart laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was harsh, mocking. "I'm a comedian, Morgan. This is a comedy show. Maybe you forgot that. Maybe you thought you were sitting down for some kind of serious, hard-hitting interview. But this is entertainment. And frankly, you're not being very entertaining right now." The words echoed through the studio. Not very entertaining. Freeman's face remained composed, but something shifted in his eyes. A decision was being made in real time. "I see," he said quietly. "So this is about entertainment." "Yeah, it is," Stewart said, leaning back again with that same smug confidence. "And right now, you're coming across as kind of uptight. Relax a little. Have some fun. Stop taking yourself so seriously." Freeman nodded slowly, as if he was processing this advice. "You want me to relax," he repeated. "You want me to have fun while you sit there and insult my career, my choices, everything I've worked for. Is that right?" Stewart shrugged. "I'm not insulting you. I'm teasing you. There's a difference. But if you can't handle a little bit of teasing, then maybe talk shows aren't really your thing. Maybe talk shows aren't really your thing." Another line crossed. Another boundary pushed. Freeman stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a quiet, dignified resolve. He reached down and unclipped the small microphone from his lapel. The sound technician in the booth probably panicked, but Freeman moved with calm certainty. "What are you doing?" Stewart asked, and for the first time, there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I'm leaving," Freeman said simply. He placed the microphone on the desk in front of Stewart, the small device making a soft thud against the wood. "I came here as a guest. I expected to be treated like one. But clearly, you have a different idea of what hospitality means." Stewart sat up straighter. "Oh, come on, Morgan. Don't be so sensitive. I was just joking around." "Were you?" Freeman asked, and his voice was quiet but powerful. "Because it didn't sound like joking to me. It sounded like you were trying to make yourself look clever at my expense. It sounded like you forgot that there's a human being sitting across from you, someone who has feelings, someone who deserves respect." The audience was completely silent now. No one was laughing. No one was clapping. Every eye in the studio was locked on these two men and the tension crackling between them. Stewart tried to recover. "Look, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we start over? We can talk about the film, talk about whatever you want." But Freeman was already walking toward the edge of the stage. "No, thank you," he said without turning around. "I think I've heard enough." Stewart stood up from behind his desk. "Morgan, seriously. Come on. Don't walk out. We're in the middle of a show." Freeman paused at the steps leading off the stage. He turned back to look at Stewart, and when he spoke, his voice filled the entire studio. "You know what the problem is, Jon? You think that just because you have a show, just because you have an audience, that gives you the right to treat people however you want, to say whatever you want, to make them feel small so you can feel big. But it doesn't work that way." "I never tried to make you feel small," Stewart protested, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Didn't you?" Freeman asked. "Every question you asked was designed to belittle what I do, to suggest that my work is somehow less than, somehow repetitive, somehow not worthy of respect. And when I pushed back, when I defended myself, you called me uptight. You told me I wasn't entertaining. You suggested that maybe I don't belong on talk shows." Stewart opened his mouth to respond, but Freeman wasn't finished. "I've been in this industry for decades," Freeman continued, and his voice was steady, powerful, completely in control. "I've worked with the best directors, the best actors, the best writers. I've told stories that mattered to people. Stories that moved them, that inspired them, that made them think. And I'm proud of that work. I'm proud of every choice I've made. So when you sit there and try to reduce it all to some kind of formula, some kind of trick, it's not just disrespectful to me. It's disrespectful to everyone who has ever connected with those stories. The camera operators didn't know where to point their cameras. The producers in the control room were probably screaming into their headsets. But none of that mattered. This moment was happening, and there was no stopping it. Stewart tried one more time. "Morgan, I apologize if I offended you. That wasn't my intention." Freeman looked at him for a long moment. "Your intention doesn't matter as much as your impact," he said. And the impact of your words tonight was clear. You wanted to put on a show. You wanted to get laughs. You wanted to prove that you could rattle the unshakable Morgan Freeman. Well, congratulations. You did it. But at what cost? He turned back toward the steps. "Where are you going?" Stewart asked, and now he sounded almost desperate. "I'm going somewhere where I'm valued," Freeman said. "Somewhere where my time and my presence are appreciated. Somewhere where people understand that respect is not optional. It's essential." Stewart tried to laugh it off, tried to play to the audience. "Folks, I think we're having a little misunderstanding here." But Freeman was already descending the steps. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio. The audience sat frozen, unsure of what to do, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't planned. This was real. Stewart called out one more time. "Morgan, please, let's talk about this." Freeman stopped at the bottom of the steps. He didn't turn around this time. He just spoke, his voice carrying across the space. "We just did talk about it, and I've said everything I need to say. Good luck with the rest of your show." And then he walked through the backstage area, past the stunned crew members, past the producers who tried to stop him, past everyone and everything. He walked with his head held high, with his dignity intact, with the quiet strength that had defined his entire career. Back on the stage, Stewart stood, alone. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was still silent. He tried to make a joke, tried to salvage the moment. "Well, that was unexpected," he said with a weak smile. But no one laughed. No one clapped. They just stared. Because they had all witnessed something rare. They had seen a man stand up for himself. They had seen someone refuse to accept disrespect, refuse to play along with a game that diminished him. They had seen Morgan Freeman draw a line and walk away when that line was crossed. Stewart returned to his desk, shuffling his note cards, trying to figure out how to continue. "We'll be right back," he mumbled, and the show cut to commercial. But the damage was done. The moment was captured. The exchange was over, but its impact would linger. In those final moments before Freeman disappeared from view, stagehands and assistants had watched in awe. They had seen countless celebrities come through those doors. They had seen arguments and disagreements and awkward moments. But they had never seen anything quite like this. They had never seen someone walk away with such purpose, such clarity, such absolute conviction that they deserved better. One camera operator would later say that he had goosebumps watching it happen. A production assistant mentioned that she wanted to applaud, but didn't dare. A writer for the show admitted that he felt ashamed, that he realized in that moment how often they prioritized cheap laughs over genuine connection. Because that's what this was really about. Connection. Respect. The basic human decency of treating someone like they matter. Stewart had forgotten that in his pursuit of entertainment, in his desire to be clever and sharp and funny. He had forgotten that the person sitting across from him was not just a prop, not just a source of material, but a human being with feelings and boundaries and self-worth. Freeman's exit was not dramatic in the traditional sense. There was no yelling, no throwing, things, no physical confrontation. But it was powerful precisely because of its restraint. He didn't need to raise his voice to make his point. He didn't need to insult Stewart or match his condescension. He simply stated his truth and walked away. And in doing so, he demonstrated a kind of strength that is far more impressive than any outburst could ever be. The silence that followed his departure said everything. It spoke of discomfort, of recognition, of the collective realization that something had gone terribly wrong. The audience had come expecting laughs and lighthearted conversation. They had gotten something much more real, much more raw, much more meaningful. Stewart tried to continue the show after the commercial break. He brought out his next guest, told his jokes, did his segments, but the energy had changed. The spell was broken. Everyone in that studio knew that they had witnessed something significant, something that would be talked about and analyzed and debated for a long time to come. Freeman's decision to walk away was not impulsive. It was the culmination of every dismissive comment, every belittling question, every attempt to reduce him to a caricature. It was the moment when he decided that his self-respect was more important than being polite, more important than finishing the interview, more important than avoiding controversy. And in making that decision, he sent a message that resonated far beyond that studio. He showed that it's okay to walk away from situations that don't serve you, that it's okay to demand respect, that it's okay to say no, even when the cameras are rolling, even when the pressure is on, to just smile and go along with it. The contrast between the two men in those final moments was striking. Stewart, still trying to control the narrative, still trying to spin it as a misunderstanding or an overreaction. Freeman, calm and resolute, refusing to engage any further, refusing to give Stewart the satisfaction of a continued argument. Throughout the entire exchange, Freeman had maintained his composure. Even when Stewart's comments became more pointed, more personal, more dismissive, Freeman never lost his cool. He responded with measured words, with controlled emotion, with the kind of dignity that cannot be taught or faked. It's the dignity that comes from knowing your worth, from understanding that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has a platform or an audience. Stewart's mistake was assuming that Freeman would play along, that he would laugh at the jokes made at his expense, that he would accept being the butt of the humor, because that's what guests are supposed to do. But Freeman refused to accept that role. He refused to be diminished, refused to be made into a punchline, refused to compromise his self-respect for the sake of entertainment. The walk-off was not planned. It was not staged. It was the genuine response of someone who had reached their limit. And that authenticity is what made it so powerful. In an industry full of rehearsed moments and calculated responses, this was pure, unscripted truth. As Freeman made his way through the backstage corridors, crew members stepped aside. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked shocked. But all of them understood that they had just witnessed something they would never forget. They had seen a master actor not acting, but simply being himself, standing up for himself, refusing to tolerate what he knew was wrong. The microphone that Freeman had placed on Stewart's desk sat there like a symbol of a conversation ended, a relationship severed, a boundary established. It was such a simple gesture, unclipping that microphone and setting it down, but it carried enormous weight. It said, "I'm done talking. I'm done explaining. I'm done trying to make you understand. I'm just done." And Stewart, for all his quick wit and clever comebacks, had no response to that. He could make jokes. He could try to minimize what had happened, but he couldn't undo it. He couldn't take back the words that had pushed Freeman to that point. He couldn't force Freeman to stay, couldn't compel him to continue an interview that had become hostile and demeaning. The audience, too, was forever changed by what they witnessed. They had come for laughs, for entertainment, for a fun evening watching their favorite talk show. Instead, they got a lesson in self-respect and dignity. They saw what it looks like when someone values themselves enough to walk away from a bad situation, regardless of the consequences. Freeman's final words before leaving the stage resonated with a truth that many people recognized in their own lives. How many times had they sat through uncomfortable situations, endured disrespect, accepted mistreatment because they didn't want to make waves or cause problems? How many times had they wished they had the courage to stand up and walk away? Watching Freeman do exactly that was cathartic for many. It was a reminder that it's possible to maintain your dignity in the face of disrespect, that you don't have to justify your worth to people who are determined not to see it, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remove yourself from a toxic situation. The technical crew watching from the wings understood the significance too. They had seen countless interviews, countless moments of tension, countless disagreements between hosts and guests. But this was different. This was not a disagreement about politics or a debate about ideas. This was about basic respect, about how you treat another human being, about the fundamental courtesy that should exist between people regardless of their status or position. Stewart's attempts to downplay what happened, to frame it as a misunderstanding or an overreaction, fell flat because everyone who watched knew better. They had heard the questions. They had seen the smirks. They had felt the condescension, dripping from every word. There was no misunderstanding. There was only the clear truth that Stewart had crossed a line, and Freeman had responded with the only power he had in that moment, the power to leave. The producers watching from the control room scrambled to figure out what to do next. How do you follow a moment like that? How do you continue a show after your guest has walked off in protest? How do you pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't? They couldn't. They could only cut to commercial and hope that somehow, when they came back, the audience would be ready to move on. But moving on wasn't that simple. The energy in the studio had fundamentally shifted. The implicit contract between host and audience, the trust that what they were watching was in good fun, had been broken. They had seen behind the curtain, seen the ugliness that can exist when ego and entitlement take over, when a host forgets that their job is to elevate their guests, not diminish them. Freeman's walk-off was a masterclass in knowing your value. He didn't need Stewart's show. He didn't need the exposure or the platform. He had a career built on excellence, on powerful performances, on work that spoke for itself. And he wasn't willing to compromise that legacy by sitting through an interview that treated him as anything less than what he was. A respected artist with decades of meaningful work behind him. The silence that filled the studio after Freeman left was deafening. It was the sound of realization, of recognition, of understanding that something important had just happened. It was the sound of people processing what they had witnessed, trying to make sense of it, trying to reconcile the entertainment they had expected with the reality they had received. Stewart's desk, which usually served as his throne, his place of power and control, suddenly seemed inadequate. He sat behind it, looking smaller somehow, diminished by the encounter. All his clever quips and practiced comebacks couldn't change what had happened. He had pushed too hard, assumed too much, and lost a guest in the process. The remaining minutes of the show limped along. Stewart tried to inject energy, tried to get back to normal, but normal was no longer possible. The elephant in the room was too big to ignore, too significant to just brush aside. Every joke felt forced. Every transition felt awkward. The show that had started with such promise had become something entirely different, something uncomfortable and revealing. Freeman, meanwhile, had left the building entirely. He didn't wait around for apologies or explanations. He didn't give Stewart the opportunity to smooth things over backstage or try to convince him to return. He simply left, got in his car, and drove away. Because he understood something fundamental, that some situations don't deserve your continued presence, don't deserve your energy, don't deserve your time. The crew members who had interacted with Freeman before the show described him as warm and professional. He had greeted everyone kindly, thanked the makeup artists, chatted with the stage managers. He had come prepared to have a good conversation, to promote his work, to connect with an audience. He had done his part. It was Stewart who had failed to do his. In the hours and days that would follow, people would analyze every word of the exchange. They would debate whether Freeman overreacted or whether Stewart went too far. But those who watched it live, who felt the tension in that studio, who saw the look in Freeman's eyes when he made the decision to leave, they knew the truth. They knew that Freeman had every right to walk away. They knew that Stewart had created a hostile environment. They knew that respect is not negotiable. The moment when Freeman stood up and began removing his microphone was the moment when everything changed. It was the moment when a guest became a person, standing up for themselves. It was the moment when an interview became a confrontation. It was the moment when entertainment crossed the line into disrespect, and Freeman handled it with the same grace and dignity that he had brought to every role he had ever played. He didn't lash out. He didn't seek revenge. He simply stated his truth and removed himself from the situation. It was powerful in its simplicity, devastating in its clarity. The audience members leaving the studio that night were quiet. They weren't buzzing with excitement about the show they had just seen. They were contemplative, thoughtful, processing what had happened. Some felt angry on Freeman's behalf. Others felt embarrassed for Stewart. But all of them understood that they had witnessed something significant. In the end, Freeman's walk-off was about more than just one bad interview. It was about standing up for yourself when it matters most. It was about refusing to accept treatment that diminishes you. It was about knowing when to say enough is enough. And it was about demonstrating through action, not just words, that self-respect is non-negotiable, that dignity is essential, and that some battles are won not by fighting, but by walking away.